He said, "No dogs allowed." But my harness wasn't just leather, it was recording. Every word, every breath, every moment of what was about to become the most important 30 minutes of my life. My name is Max, and I'm what humans call a guide dog. Golden Retriever, 4 years old, trained at the finest facility in California. But today, I wasn't just Sarah's eyes. I was about to become her voice of justice. Do you know what it's like to be invisible and essential at the same time? To be dismissed as just a pet while being someone's lifeline to independence? Let me tell you what really happens when discrimination thinks no one is watching, because someone always is. And today, that someone was wearing a harness equipped with something Robert Kane never saw coming. Sarah's fingers found the familiar groove behind my right ear as we approached the Golden Fork. It was our Tuesday ritual, lunch after her morning classes at the community college, where she taught literature to first-year students. Her students adored her, never knowing that the woman who brought Shakespeare to life couldn't see the words she quoted from memory. That's Sarah Mitchell for you. Blind since 15, brilliant at 28, and more determined than anyone I've ever guided through the maze of everyday ignorance. The restaurant buzzed with the usual symphony of clinking silverware and muffled conversations. The smell of garlic bread made my mouth water, though I'd never show it. Professional discipline runs in my genes, trained into every muscle, every instinct. Sarah's hand rested lightly on my harness handle as I navigated us through the entrance, my paws silent on the polished tiles. I'd done this hundreds of times in hundreds of places, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the way the conversations seemed to pause as we entered. Maybe it was the sharp intake of breath from the hostess station, or maybe it was the heavy footsteps approaching us with purpose too aggressive for simple customer service. "Excuse me." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Deep, authoritative, carrying the kind of confidence that comes from years of never being questioned. I felt Sarah's grip tighten slightly on my harness. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders straightening, chin lifting just a degree. She'd heard that tone before. We both had. It was the sound of someone who'd already made up their mind about us before we'd even ordered. I turned my head slightly, assessing. The man approaching wore a crisp white shirt with a name tag that read, Robert Kane, manager. Mid-40s, graying temples, the kind of artificial smile that never reaches the eyes. His gaze flickered over Sarah dismissively before settling on me with unconcealed annoyance. Behind him, I noticed a young waitress with kind eyes watching nervously. Other diners had begun to notice the tension, conversations dropping to whispers. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow pets in the dining area," he continued, his voice carrying that particular brand of politeness that barely masks contempt. "You'll need to leave your dog outside or find somewhere else to eat." Sarah's response was measured, patient. She'd had this conversation before, though it never got easier. "This is my guide dog," she explained, her voice steady despite the familiar knot I could sense forming in her stomach. "Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, he's allowed to accompany me anywhere the public is permitted." What Robert Kane didn't know, what none of them ever knew, was that every word of this conversation was being captured by the small, nearly invisible recording device built into my harness. Sarah's advocacy organization had equipped several guide dogs with these devices after a series of discrimination cases needed better evidence. We were part of a pilot program, silent witnesses to a world that often forgot we were watching. Kane's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Guide dog? Look, lady, I can see you looking right at me. You're not blind." The restaurant fell silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause. Sarah's face flushed, but her voice remained steady. "Visual impairment exists on a spectrum, sir. I have some light perception, but I am legally blind and require Max's assistance for safe navigation." I felt her hand tremble slightly on my harness. She hated having to justify her existence, hated explaining her disability to strangers who thought they could diagnose her with a glance. But what Kane couldn't see, what he'd never understand, was that his next words were about to seal his fate. "So look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running here, but I wasn't born yesterday." Kane's voice dropped lower, more menacing. The recording device in my harness captured every syllable, every pause, every breath heavy with contempt. "You walk in here just fine. You look around, you can obviously see. What's next? You're going to slip and fall and sue us." Sarah's face went pale. I'd seen this reaction before. The shock of someone realizing they're facing not just ignorance, but deliberate cruelty. Her fingers found that spot behind my ear again, seeking comfort in the familiar texture of my fur. It was a tell I'd learned to recognize. She was fighting back tears. "Sir, I assure you that Max is a legitimate service animal. I have his certification if you'd like to see." "Certification?" Kane interrupted with a snort. "Anyone can print those online. You know what I think? I think you bought that vest on Amazon and trained your pet to walk in a straight line. I've seen it all before, people trying to bring their emotional support peacocks, their comfort cats, their fake service dogs. Well, not in my restaurant." The whispers around us grew louder. I could sense the discomfort rippling through the dining room like a wave. An elderly couple at table 6 had stopped eating entirely, watching with obvious distress. A businessman near the window was discreetly filming with his phone. Good, more witnesses, more evidence. Kane stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a private conversation, but my enhanced hearing caught every word. So did my harness. "Between you and me, sweetheart, the blind act might work on bleeding hearts, but I know a con when I see one. Your guide dog here is probably just a well-trained golden retriever. Nice touch with the vest, though. Very official looking." Sarah's voice wavered for the first time. "Please, I just want to have lunch. I'm a regular customer at other locations. I've never had this problem before." "Yeah, well, this is my location, and I run a respectable establishment. We have health codes to follow, real ones, not fake disability exemptions." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. I felt her body sag slightly, the confidence she'd built over years of navigating an inaccessible world cracking under the weight of such casual cruelty. But Kane wasn't finished. He was enjoying this now, feeding off her discomfort like some kind of predator. "Tell you what," he continued, his voice taking on a mock-helpful tone, "there's a nice park across the street. You and your service animal can have a lovely picnic there. But in here, we serve real customers with real needs." The young waitress, Emma, according to her name tag, finally found her voice. "Mr. Kane, maybe we should just—" "Emma, get back to work. This doesn't concern you." His tone was sharp enough to make her flinch, but I noticed she didn't move away. She was recording too, holding her phone at an angle that captured Kane's profile. "Smart girl." Sarah tried one more time, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand your concerns, but the law is very clear about service animals. I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want to exercise my rights as—" "Rights?" Kane's laugh was loud enough to carry across the entire restaurant. "Let me tell you about rights. I have the right to run my business without being scammed by con artists. I have the right to maintain health standards, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose." A man in an expensive suit at table 12 was paying attention now, his lawyer instincts clearly triggered by Kane's words. He'd set down his fork and was listening intently, occasionally shaking his head. I made a mental note of him. Something about his posture suggested he might be important later. Kane's voice grew louder, more confident. He was playing to his audience now, convinced he was in the right. "You know what really gets me? People like you make it harder for actual disabled people. Real blind people who actually need help have to deal with skepticism because of frauds like you." Sarah's hand was shaking on my harness now. The words were cutting deep, each accusation a reminder of every door that had been slammed in our faces, every clerk who'd treated her like an inconvenience, every person who'd assumed her disability was somehow her fault. But Kane's biggest mistake was assuming that humiliation would make us leave quietly. What he didn't know was that every word, Every cruel assumption, every illegal threat was being preserved in digital clarity. The device in my harness was capturing not just his voice, but the ambient sounds that would prove the public nature of his discrimination. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of shocked customers, the scrape of chairs as people turned to watch, all of it evidence, all of it damning. "Look," Kane said, his patience clearly at an end. "I'm trying to be nice here, but you're starting to cause a scene. Either you leave voluntarily or I call security and have you escorted out. Your choice." Sarah's shoulders squared. When she spoke, her voice was steady again, carrying the dignity that years of teaching had given her. "I understand you've made your position clear, but before I go, I think there are some people here who might be interested in hearing exactly what you've said." That's when Kane made his fatal error. Instead of backing down, instead of reconsidering, he doubled down. "Bring it on, lady." "So I stand by every word. Someone needs to call out these fake disability scams, and I'm not afraid to be that someone." The tension in the restaurant was electric now. Kane had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. His voice grew even louder, as if volume could somehow make his discrimination more legitimate. I felt Sarah's pulse quickening through her grip on my harness, but she stood her ground. This was no longer just about lunch. This was about dignity, about justice, about every person with a disability who'd ever been made to feel like they were lying about their own existence. "You want to know what I really think?" Kane continued, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "I think people like you are parasites. You exploit the kindness of legitimate businesses. You take advantage of laws meant to protect actually disabled people, and you make the rest of us look bad for questioning obvious fraud." The businessman at table 12, I'd learn later his name was James Morrison, suddenly looked up from his phone with sharp interest. He'd been typing furiously, but now his full attention was on Kane. Something in his expression had shifted from casual interest to professional focus. A lawyer recognizing a case being built in real time. Kane was warming up now, feeding off what he mistook for supportive silence from his customers. "And another thing," he said, pointing directly at me, "that's not even how real guide dogs behave. Real service dogs don't look around. They don't pay attention to food smells. They're completely focused on their handler. Your dog keeps looking at me, keeps looking around the room. Dead giveaway." What Kane didn't realize was that I was indeed focused on recording every word, every gesture, every moment of his spectacular self-destruction. The device in my harness was capturing everything in crystal clear audio. His voice, the gasps from other customers, the nervous shuffling of the waitstaff who knew they were witnessing something terrible. Emma, the young waitress, had gone pale. She kept glancing between Kane and the other customers, clearly horrified by her boss's behavior, but too frightened to intervene directly. Her phone was still recording, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep it steady. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice carrying the patience of someone who'd spent years educating the ignorant. "I understand your skepticism, but questioning the legitimacy of a service animal based on your personal observations isn't just wrong, it's illegal. The ADA specifically prohibits—" "Don't quote laws at me," Kane exploded. "I know the law and I know fraud when I see it. You walk in here looking around like any normal person with your fake dog and your fake disability, expecting special treatment. Well, I've got news for you. This isn't a charity, this is a business." The elderly couple at table 6 had heard enough. The woman, probably in her 70s, stood up slowly and walked toward us. Her husband followed, his face flushed with anger. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quavering but determined. "I've been watching this whole interaction, and I'm appalled. Even if you had legitimate concerns, there's no excuse for treating anyone this way." Kane whirled on her. "Ma'am, this is between me and the customer. Please return to your table." "The customer?" The elderly woman's voice rose. "This young lady is a customer, and you're treating her like a criminal." Now the businessman, James, was standing too. His movement was deliberate, authoritative. Everything about his posture screamed attorney. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I think everyone here would be very interested in understanding exactly what's happening, because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a textbook case of disability discrimination. Kane's confidence faltered for just a moment, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. And you are? James Morrison, civil rights attorney, and I've been documenting this entire interaction. He held up his phone. Both video and audio, would you like to continue? But Kane was too far gone to stop now. His face was red, his voice getting higher. I don't care if you're the Supreme Court. I have the right to refuse service to fraudsters, and that's exactly what this is. Fraud! The word fraud echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Other customers were pulling out their phones now, the modern instinct to document injustice taking over. A young mother covered her child's ears. A teenage boy was live streaming on what looked like TikTok. Kane was creating his own viral moment, and he didn't even realize it. You know what really pisses me off? Kane was in full rant mode now, any pretense of customer service long abandoned. People like you make legitimate disabled people look bad. When real blind people come in here, I'll have to question them because of scammers like you. You're hurting the very community you're pretending to be part of. Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from shame but from rage. From the exhaustion of constantly having to prove her humanity to people who'd decided she was lying before she'd even spoken. But her voice remained steady. Mr. Kane, you've made your position very clear, but I think there might be something you'd like to hear before we leave. That's when James Morrison stepped forward, his lawyer instincts sensing something important. Excuse me, miss, but did you say there's something we should hear? Sarah looked toward James, guided by my subtle positioning. Yes. You see, Max here isn't just a guide dog. He's part of a pilot program. His harness has been recording this entire conversation. The color drained from Kane's face. Recording? You can't record me without permission. That's illegal. James smiled grimly. Actually, in a public establishment with multiple witnesses, it's perfectly legal. One-party consent law. And given that you've been speaking loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. Kane's bluster faltered. You can't use that against me. Use it against you, James repeated. So you've just spent 15 minutes publicly discriminating against a disabled person while being recorded by multiple devices. The question isn't whether it can be used against you. The question is how many different ways it will be. But Kane's pride wouldn't let him back down. Even faced with the reality of his situation, he doubled down one last time. I don't care what you recorded. I stand by everything I said. This woman is a fraud, that dog is fake, and I'd say it all again. Sarah looked toward the sound of his voice, her expression calm despite the storm raging inside her. I was hoping you wouldn't say that, Mr. Kane, but thank you for making this very clear. She turned slightly toward James. Would you like to hear exactly what he said? The restaurant had transformed into a courtroom, and everyone knew it. James Morrison's question hung in the air like a challenge. Would you like to hear exactly what he said? Every customer, every staff member, every person within earshot was now a witness to what was about to unfold. Kane tried to regain control, his voice shaky but defiant. Now wait just a minute. You can't just... Actually, I can, Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite the emotional toll of the last 20 minutes. Mr. Morrison, would you mind helping me access the recording? There's a small button on the side of Max's harness. James approached carefully, respectfully asking permission before touching my equipment. His fingers found the discreet control panel that Sarah's advocacy organization had installed. The device was state-of-the-art, designed specifically for situations like this. How far back should we go? He asked. From the beginning, Sarah replied. I think everyone deserves to hear the complete conversation. Kane's face was now completely pale. You can't do this. This is entrapment. This is justice. said the elderly woman who had stood up earlier. Her husband nodded vigorously beside her. "We all heard what you said, young man. The recording will just prove it." The teenage boy who'd been live streaming called out, "I've got like 3,000 people watching right now. They want to hear this too." His mother shushed him, but she didn't tell him to stop filming. Emma, the waitress, was openly crying now, not from sadness but from anger at her boss's behavior. She'd worked here for 2 years, had never seen anything like this. Other staff members were gathering at the kitchen door, drawn by the commotion. Word was spreading through the restaurant like wildfire. James found the playback button. "Ready?" he asked Sarah. She nodded. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," James announced in his courtroom voice. "We're about to hear a recording of this entire interaction, captured by this service dog's specialized equipment. I think it's important that everyone understands exactly what happened here." The first words that emerged from my harness speaker were crystal clear. "Excuse me. I'm sorry, but we don't allow pets in the dining area." Kane's own voice from 20 minutes ago filled the now silent restaurant. Even he couldn't deny it was him speaking. As the recording continued, playing back his escalating discrimination, the reaction in the room was immediate and visceral. Gasps of shock, murmurs of disbelief. The businessman at the window shook his head in disgust. The young mother pulled her child closer, whispering something about how not to treat people. But the most powerful moment came when Kane's own words echoed back at him. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running here, but I wasn't born yesterday. You walk in here just fine, you look around, you can obviously see what's next. You're going to slip and fall and sue us." The silence that followed was deafening. Kane tried to speak, but James held up a hand. "Please, let's hear the rest." The recording continued. Each cruel word, each dismissive laugh, each illegal threat preserved in digital perfection. When it reached the part where Kane called Sarah a parasite and a fraud, several customers actually gasped out loud. The elderly woman placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. "My dear," she whispered, "I am so sorry you had to endure this." When Kane's voice on the recording declared, "I stand by everything I said. This woman is a fraud, that dog is fake, and I'd say it all again." The present-day Kane seemed to shrink into himself. The recording stopped. The silence stretched. Then James Morrison spoke, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "Mr. Kane, you've just been confronted with irrefutable evidence of disability discrimination in front of multiple witnesses, while being filmed by several devices. Do you have anything to say?" Kane's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the dawning realization of what he'd done, what it would cost him. I was just... The health codes. The Americans with Disabilities Act supersedes your health codes, James said firmly, and nothing in any health code authorizes the treatment this woman received. The teenage live streamer called out again, "Chat is going crazy. Everyone's asking for the restaurant's name." His mother didn't shush him this time. Emma finally found her voice. "Mr. Kane," she said quietly, "I think you need to call Mrs. Rodriguez." Mrs. Rodriguez, the owner. Kane's face went ashen. He'd forgotten that everything happening here would have to be explained to the person who actually owned the Golden Fork. The person who would have to deal with the legal ramifications, the public relations nightmare, the potential lawsuits. "This isn't over," Kane muttered, but his voice carried no conviction. He was a man who just watched his career implode in real time. "You're absolutely right," James Morrison replied. "This is just the beginning." What happened next was like watching dominoes fall. James Morrison pulled out his business card and handed it to Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, I specialize in disability rights cases. I'd like to represent you pro bono, if you're interested." Before Sarah could respond, the elderly woman stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Margaret Phillips, retired federal judge. What I witnessed here today was a clear violation of federal civil rights law. I'll testify on your behalf." Her husband nodded gravely, "As will I." Harold Phillips also retired from the bench. Kane's world was collapsing around him in real time. 2 federal judges, a civil rights attorney, multiple video recordings, and crystal clear audio evidence. But the final blow was yet to come. Emma, who had been quietly crying throughout the playback, suddenly straightened up. "Mr. Kane, there's something else you should know." Her voice was shaking but determined. "I've been recording you for weeks. Your comments about customers, your discriminatory attitudes. I kept thinking someone needed to do something, but I was too scared to speak up. Until today." She held up her phone. "I have everything. The time you refused service to the veteran with PTSD, the time you mocked the woman with the speech impediment, the time you told me to seat the normal-looking customers first." Kane's face went from pale to gray. "Emma, you're fired." "You can't fire me," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "I quit, and Mrs. Rodriguez is going to hear about everything." The teenage live streamer's excitement was palpable. "Guys, this is insane. The comments are exploding. People are sharing this everywhere." His mother finally looked at his screen and gasped. "Honey, how many people are watching?" "Like 12,000 now, and climbing." The young mother at table 4 stood up, her child in her arms. "I want to make a statement too," she announced. "My daughter has autism. She uses a service dog for emotional regulation. What this man said today, it's exactly the kind of ignorance that makes our lives harder every single day." More customers began standing, each with their own story, their own experience with discrimination. The restaurant had become an impromptu support group, united by their shared witness to injustice. But then came the sound everyone had been waiting for, heels clicking rapidly across the tile floor. A petite woman in her 50s burst through the kitchen doors, her face flushed with exertion and fury. "What in God's name is happening in my restaurant?" Mrs. Maria Rodriguez, owner of the Golden Fork, had arrived. Kane tried to speak first. "Mrs. Rodriguez, there's been a misunderstanding." "Robert, be quiet." Her voice cut through his excuse like a blade. She looked around the restaurant, taking in the scene. Customers standing, phones recording, Emma crying, and Sarah standing dignified in the center of it all with me at her side. "Ma'am," James Morrison stepped forward. "I'm James Morrison, attorney. Your manager has just committed multiple acts of disability discrimination against this woman and her service dog. It's all been recorded." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "Recorded?" Sarah spoke quietly. "Would you like to hear it, Mrs. Rodriguez?" The restaurant owner listened to the entire recording in stunned silence. With each of Kane's words, her expression grew darker. When it finished, she turned to Kane with barely controlled rage. "Robert Kane, you are fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Kane sputtered. "You can't do this. I was protecting your business. You were destroying it." Mrs. Rodriguez's voice echoed through the restaurant. "In 30 years of running restaurants, I have never been so ashamed. Get out, now." As Kane was escorted away by security, Mrs. Rodriguez turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Miss, I don't know your name, but I owe you the deepest apology. What happened here today is unforgivable." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied graciously. "And I appreciate your response, Mrs. Rodriguez. Please call me Maria. And please, you and Max, would you do me the honor of being my guests for lunch? It's the least I can do." The entire restaurant erupted in applause. The teenage live streamer was practically bouncing with excitement. "This is the best ending ever. Justice served." Emma approached with a menu, her tears now tears of relief. "Ms. Mitchell, it would be my honor to serve you today, and Max gets anything he wants from the kitchen." I looked up at Sarah, my tail wagging slightly. For the first time in 25 minutes, she smiled. "I think Max would like that very much." As we were seated at the best table in the house, James Morrison was already making calls. "I'm contacting the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. This needs to be documented officially." Dr. Phillips nodded approvingly. "And I'm calling some former colleagues who specialize in disability law. This case could set important precedents." But perhaps the most important call was the one Emma made to the local Disability Advocacy Center. "Hi, this is Emma Chen at the Golden Fork restaurant. We just had an incident here. But it ended with justice being served. I think you'd want to know about a service dog named Max and his recording harness. He just changed everything. 3 months later, I'm wearing the same harness, but everything else has changed. The Golden Fork has become a model for disability accessibility, with Maria Rodriguez implementing comprehensive staff training and installing tactile menus. Emma is now the assistant manager, and she greets every customer with genuine warmth. The recording device in my harness helped convict Robert Kane of federal civil rights violations. He was fined, mandated to undergo sensitivity training, and banned from working in customer service. But the real victory wasn't his punishment. It was what grew from that terrible day. Sarah's case, represented by James Morrison, led to a landmark settlement that funded accessibility improvements in restaurants across 3 states. The video of our encounter, shared millions of times, sparked a national conversation about hidden disabilities and the assumptions people make. Dr. Margaret Phillips used her judicial connections to fast-track legislation requiring better training for service industry employees. The teenage live streamer, whose real name turned out to be Marcus, became an unlikely advocate for disability rights, using his platform to educate young people about respect and inclusion. But perhaps the most important change happened within Sarah herself. That day at the Golden Fork taught her that she didn't have to accept discrimination quietly. She left her teaching job to become a full-time disability rights advocate, traveling the country with me to train businesses and educate communities. We've visited hundreds of restaurants now, and I wear my harness with pride, knowing that every interaction is making the world a little more accessible. The recording device has captured dozens of positive encounters too, managers going above and beyond, staff members treating Sarah with dignity, customers offering help respectfully. For every Robert Kane, there are hundreds of good people who just needed to see discrimination exposed to understand how to do better. Emma sends us updates regularly. The Golden Fork's business doubled after the story went viral, with people traveling from other cities just to dine somewhere that truly welcomed everyone. She's opened 2 more locations, each one designed from the ground up, with accessibility in mind. Last week we received a letter from a young girl named Amy, whose family had been denied service at a restaurant because of her autism service dog. The manager remembered our story, reviewed the security footage, and realized they'd made a terrible mistake. They not only apologized, but hired Amy's mother to help train their staff on disability awareness. Amy wrote to thank Max for teaching grown-ups how to be nice. As I write this story in my mind, Sarah is preparing for another speaking engagement. Tonight we'll address a convention of restaurant owners about the business case for inclusion. The device in my harness will record this too, not as evidence of discrimination, but as proof of progress. Do you want to know what I've learned in all my years as a guide dog? That justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. It's about turning a moment of cruelty into a catalyst for change. It's about giving voices to those who've been silenced and dignity to those who've been dismissed. That day at the Golden Fork, when Robert Kane said, "No dogs allowed," he thought he was ending our story. Instead, he was just giving us the opening line of something much bigger. Sarah rubs that spot behind my ear, the signal that we're ready to go change another heart, another mind, another policy. The recording device in my harness powers up, ready to capture whatever comes next. Because I don't bark often, but I listen always. And today, like every day, we're ready to let justice speak. The revolution will be recorded, one conversation at a time, one harness at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And I'll be there, watching, listening, remembering everything.